Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because, well, we're diving into this truly fascinating high-stakes battle. And the crazy thing, it might literally be happening right under your feet right now. We're going to unpack the hidden science of disaster recovery. It's really this intense man versus nature clash that kicks off the second water invades your home. To do this, we're looking at a super interesting case study pulled directly from the front lines of water damage restoration in Antelope, California. Okay, let's jump right in. So picture this. What actually happens when 105-degree summer heat meets aging 1980s plumbing? It's a hyper-specific, highly localized threat, but man, it is the harsh reality for thousands of homeowners out there. You see, these extreme temperature swings just completely stress out older copper supply lines until, pop, you get a pinhole leak. And the absolute second that happens, boom, you are thrust into this intense, highly scientific race against time. Because let's be clear, this battle isn't just about mopping up a puddle on the floor. It's a full-scale, microscopic war to save the actual structural integrity of a house. To help us survive this chaos, we've put together a bit of a roadmap. First, we'll uncover Antelope's hidden water threats. Then we'll get into that intense race against time. After that, we'll break down the three-phase restoration process, dive deep into the actual science of structural drying, and finally, we'll navigate the tricky world of insurance and costs. All right, starting off with Section 1, Antelope's hidden water threats and the unique microclimate working against your home. This is where geography and infrastructure essentially team up to create the perfect storm for a disaster. Now, the main culprit behind a lot of these hidden threats is a concept called hydrostatic pressure. I know, it sounds like something straight out of a boring physics textbook, right? But stay with me, because this invisible force is exactly why the expansive clay soil in the Sacramento area absolutely wreaks havoc on home foundations. When those heavy winter storms roll in, that thick clay soil traps the water instead of letting it drain away. This creates just an immense amount of pressure that literally forces pooling groundwater right up through solid concrete slab foundations and straight into the house. It's relentless and totally invisible until it's too late. And you know, that local geography links directly to some very real everyday threats. If you're living in neighborhoods around there, like Ridgepoint or Woodridge, you've got some specific antagonists lurking in the background. We're talking about flash floods from Dry Creek completely overwhelming those outdated culverts. We've got those aging 1980s copper pipes just giving up the ghost in the summer heat. And out in the more rural areas, maybe near the Placer County border, you're looking at well water pressure tanks failing and septic systems overflowing the second we get heavy rain. These really aren't just random freak accidents. They're entirely predictable clashes between Mother Nature and aging local infrastructure. Which brings us right to Section 2, the race against time, the ticking clock of exponential damage. Because here's the thing, once that water actually breaches your home, it's no longer just a puddle you can ignore. It becomes this active, spreading infection that demands a massive, rapid response. Make no mistake, time is your absolute biggest enemy here. As the clock ticks down, those first 4 hours are absolutely critical. Within hour 1, you desperately need an emergency response and extraction. Why? Because by hour 4, the structural damage is escalating aggressively. Let it sit for 24 to 48 hours and mold spores are already colonizing and germinating. And the entire structural drawing timeline to fix all of this, that's going to take a full 3 to 7 days. So the biggest takeaway here is this. What happens in those first 4 hours literally dictates whether you're looking at a manageable $3,000 fix or a catastrophic $30,000 gut and rebuild. Now, to actually win that race in the first hour, the pros don't mess around. They bring in the heavy artillery, 100. Think about that number. That is the massive volume of water, 100 gallons per minute, that these industrial truck-mounted extractors can pump out of a flooded house during that crucial first hour. You just cannot match that kind of power with a couple of wet/dry vacs and some beach towels. It absolutely requires rapid response, industrial firepower. Moving right along to Section 3, the three-phase restoration process, or honestly, what I like to call the scientific counterattack. You see, the restoration industry doesn't just show up and guess what to do. They follow strict, highly methodical protocols, specifically the IICRC S500 standards, to stop the damage and essentially reverse the clock. It's a very clean 3-step process. Step 1 is emergency water removal. That means sucking up all that standing water and ripping out soaked, unsalvageable carpets right away. Step 2 is structural drying and monitoring, where technicians are meticulously tracking moisture levels every single day. And finally, Step 3 is sanitization and reconstruction. This is where they're running continuous HEPA air scrubbers and laying down EPA-registered antimicrobials, just to make the living space safe and breathable again. It is incredibly systematic. But let's dig into the really complex part of all this in Section 4, the science of structural drawing. Because, frankly, what you can't see is exactly what's going to destroy your home. We're talking about those invisible, lingering threats, hiding way behind the drywall and deep underneath your subfloors. There is a stark contrast here that a lot of folks just don't fully grasp. It's the massive difference between basic water damage cleanup and actual complete remediation. The amateur DIY myth is that you can just point a cheap box fan at a wet carpet, cross your fingers, and wait. But doing that, it only removes the surface water you can see, and it practically guarantees you're going to have a secondary mold problem later. True, complete remediation is a whole different ballgame. It relies on high-tech tools like thermal imaging cameras to hunt down hidden moisture pockets, and it's grounded in intense, localized science. And a huge part of that intense science involves something called psychrometric calculations. Yeah, big word, I know. But essentially, professionals use complex math to perfectly match their dehumidifier capacity to the exact volume of the room and the specific moisture load of the wet materials. Why go through all that trouble? Well, in a place like California's Central Valley, the relative humidity swings like crazy, from bone-dry 15% in the summer all the way up to a muggy 90% in the winter. You have to constantly manipulate the air pressure and airflow to actively force that moisture to evaporate out of the wood framing and drywall. Which leads us to bust a really massive myth. As the real restoration experts will boldly tell you, claims of 24-hour drying are marketing lies that leave moisture trapped in building cavities. Seriously, true structural drying just cannot happen overnight. You can't cheat physics. It demands a solid 3 to 7 days of verified, double-checked moisture readings using specialized meters. You have to prove scientifically that those building materials have returned to their normal dry state. Anything less is honestly just a Band-Aid covering up a rotting wound. All right, let's pivot a bit to Section 5, navigating insurance and costs, focusing on the aftermath and recovery. Because even after the scientific rescue operation is in full swing, you still have to deal with these super fun practical realities, like the dreaded paperwork, and of course, figuring out how to pay for all of this. So several key variables are really going to drive your final bill. First off, the category of the water is a huge factor. Category 3 water, which is basically a sewage backup, is going to cost significantly more to clean up than Category 1, which is just clean water from a supply line. And that's all because of the strict hazmat safety protocols required for sewage. Then, obviously you have the affected square footage. A massive basement flood costs way more than a tiny bathroom leak. But the materials matter just as much. Hardwood flooring and solid concrete are incredibly stubborn. They require much longer, much more expensive drying times compared to standard carpet. And this right here is exactly why that thermal imaging proof we talked about earlier is so vital. You need hard, undeniable photographic evidence showing exactly how much space and what materials were wet, just to satisfy those strict insurance adjusters. Now, a truly great restoration job doesn't just fix the past, it protects your future. So here are some really actionable takeaways for your reconstruction phase. You want to armor plate your home. You do this by installing proper vapor barriers to stop that sneaky hydrostatic pressure we talked about. You also want to bring your insulation fully up to modern California Title 24 codes. While you're at it, improve the exterior grading around your house so rainwater actually flows away from the foundation. And finally, install pressure regulators to protect those aging plumbing supply lines from bursting in the first place. It is all about building back smarter, not just returning it to how it was. So as we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. If a slow, tiny pinhole leak started behind your drywall today, how long would it take for you to actually notice? Would it be hours, days, months? You see, the invisible threats in our homes are often the absolute most destructive ones. By understanding the hidden science of how water moves and exactly how the professionals fight it, it doesn't just satisfy our curiosity. It genuinely empowers us to protect our most valuable asset. So keep an eye on those hidden spaces, and always remember, when water strikes, time and science are everything.